Good morning, and welcome to Redeemer Lutheran Church. I'm Pastor Gary Lodeholt. I really enjoy those Pastor Gary Live episodes when I get to tell you the Bible story of some obscure character you likely have never heard of, but who has an interesting story and something to tell us about God as well. My second favorite way to present this morning moment to you is to highlight a Bible story that you probably aren't familiar with. Most likely, you aren't very familiar with any of the other stories we will look at this week as we talk about times that God divided the waters. Today we want to talk about Joshua and entering the promised land. Let me first remind you that when the Bible says 40, it means a long time or as long as it took. It doesn't usually mean exactly 40 days or years. It means as long as it took to come to the right time for the next thing. So when God freed the Hebrew people from slavery in Egypt, they wandered for 40 years in the wilderness. When their time of wandering had come to an end, it was time for them to go into the land that God had promised them. Only the thing was, Moses wouldn't be the one to lead them. As they entered the promised land, it was a new time that called for new leadership. Moses died, and Joshua was now the leader. There were two obstacles in the way of them entering the promised land. One was the walled city of Jericho with its army. Well, that's another story for another day. But before that was the other obstacle, the Jordan River. How do you get the whole nation across to enter the land? That's when God acts again. God tells Joshua to have the priests who were carrying the Ark of the Covenant to wade into the river. Now the Bible goes to great pains to say that the river was in its cycle near harvest time when it typically overflowed its banks. We are being told how difficult the problem is in how the Jordan River was at flood stage. Nevertheless, the priests were to wade in while carrying the ark. Then, before the action starts, God tells Joshua that what is about to happen will show the people that leadership has transferred from Moses to him. It's a new day for them all. Then God causes the river to, as the Bible says, pile up in a heap. That's an interesting way of saying that far upriver, near a city, the river stopped flowing. It piled up, as it were, leaving the way across the riverbed clear for everyone to cross. God told Joshua to have one man from each tribe to take a stone from the bottom of the riverbed before the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant came out themselves. Once they had the 12 stones, they stacked them up to make a monument. God said, "When your children and your children's children ask what these stones mean, you tell them what I did this day." And so the people entered the land God promised them. And once more, there is much we can glean from this story. First, God's care for the people continued even over such a long time. God led them out of Egypt, but that wasn't enough. God also led them into the promised land. And we shouldn't overlook that it is the promised land. Land, a place that God had promised them to be theirs. God is true to God's promises. Another insight might be that there are seasons for things. The season of Moses' leadership was over. Now was Joshua's time. God's way moves forward, and we don't look back, pining for the old. God leads us into the new. Maybe that last part is especially important for Lutherans who are known for being somewhat resistant to change. The call to all of us is to be open to the new thing that God is doing among us. Well, I started by saying that this wasn't a very familiar story, but here at the end I've changed my mind. This story is very familiar because it's our story. God's care continues for us. God is true to God's promises. God leads us out of the old and into the new. And no obstacle stands in the way. Thanks for watching, and remember to let this day belong to God.